Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Project Flux Weekly Pulse. And we do have Yoshi back, although I think he's still in holiday mode.
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of. Well, it's just been a couple of days, so we'll let you off. But I think that's it for you for a while, isn't it, in terms of holidays? Or you've got more coming up?
Part-timer.
Well, I would say quarter timer, but you might get offended there. So I've had to struggle on with the podcast and the newsletter, but some of you may have noticed, the eagle-eyed out there might have noticed the absolute botch job I did on the graphics for the last two podcasts, because Yoshi's the graphics design expert, and I realised he was gone, so I had to do my best. So if you look closely, it's pretty appalling. But I haven't had any complaints, so I'm pretty pleased. Before we go on, just to remind everyone that on Friday, we've got a podcast coming out with Ali Maffei from Timist. We've just finished recording that interview, and it was absolutely fascinating. So do tune into that. Ali's got so many great ideas, a few of them a little bit controversial. So tune into that. That will be published on Friday. But for now, we want to talk about some of the big stories that's happened in the world of AI in projects and productivity. Again, lots of stuff happening, Yoshi. I'm going to focus in on two or three in the course of this sort of half hour or so. But for anyone who wants to see the full works, please just go to the newsletter. It'll be on the show notes, and subscribe so you don't miss out. But the first one, and I really struggled this time because there's so many kind of stories out there to try and pick the big news. In fact, I struggle pretty much every week to try and work out what the big news is. But I thought the EU Act is important, because even though we've known that's been passed and ready to come into action, it's actually being enforced from the 1st of August, which means it's real. You know, we've got this act and it's having impacts on the world of projects and productivity already, because we know that some of the tech firms have not taken too kindly to some of it. And, for instance, we cannot use the Meta large language model, Llama. It's not available in the EU unless you use a VPN. So, this is quite a big thing. It has a practical impact on the way that we're going to be able to utilize some of these tools. And what I worry about, I suppose, is the fact that it's going to create a two-tier system. There's going to be countries that are going to be able to do pretty much what they want. And then there's going to be countries restricted by the EU Act who aren't going to be able to do what they want. And where's the balance right? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have this kind of legislation. I think legislation is good, but where it becomes restrictive and stops people from being innovative, and then also creates two different tiers of systems, I don't think that's the answer either. So I don't know, what's your view on it all, Yoshi?
So for me, like within the UK and America and a lot of the Western countries, we live in a very capitalist society. And I think in this age of AI where the developments are growing exponentially, fighting against that is I think counterproductive. And I think the approach which America's taking, which is to give a lot more agency to these tech developers to really drive innovation at the frontiers. The EU having such a strong risk-based approach and, centralizing a lot of the governance and putting a lot of restrictions on the developers and also those who kind of deploy a lot of these AI models, I think it's going to stifle innovation quite a bit. And we're already at a disadvantage on this side of the we are losing a lot of our AI talent, right? They're going abroad, and this is only going to push them further ashore. So,
it certainly will. I mean, the UK is in a good place in terms of the investment that it's having in AI. But if there's things that they just cannot utilize, there's going to be very smart people who are saying, well, actually, I need to, see if there's opportunities available elsewhere. But just for the user, just to kind of break down what the EU Act says, and this is not doing it full justice, so read it all up if you can, but effectively it splits things into different, but there's a framework and there's different kind of approaches. So minimal risk systems like spam filters, video games, they don't face really any obligation under the Act. Then you've got the specific transparency risks. So things like chatbots, so your ChatGPT, that they must clearly inform users that they are interacting with a machine. And then you've got high risk stuff, such as medical software, AR systems used for recruitment must really comply with the requirements, including demonstrating risk mitigation systems. And then you've got the top tier, which is the unacceptable risks. So systems that allow social scoring by governments, where bias starts creeping in. I totally get, it's all sensible stuff, like in theory, but then where do you draw the line between those? And I'm sure there's going to be test cases coming up where someone says, well, actually what I've developed is minimal risk, and then a judge says, no, this is high risk under the act. That's where I think we're going to get to.
It's quite ambiguous as well, because I was looking at what they're categorizing as high risk, limited risk, unacceptable risk, and under limited risk, right, which is the bottom 50% in terms of how they're trying to govern this is deep fakes. And deep fakes have the potential to cause a lot of damage if people use it in a malevolent way. The question that I have is that I don't know how they're coming to categorize what determines a high risk or an unacceptable risk AI. And I think they're imposing a lot of these restrictions on something which we don't know much about. I mean, when you ask people about AI, you have a multitude of perceptions in terms of what it is. We don't even know what intelligence is as humans, yet let alone it with an AI. So how do you then say, you might have an idea that someone's developed from an AI model, you might categorize it as a limited risk, and then that might end up having a huge consequence in the future because you haven't governed it properly. So I think there needs to be more, we need to aim to get to a better understanding of what AI is. So that's kind of the negative that I would say, is that it's too restrictive and you're imposing a lot of governance and regulation on something that we don't know much about. However, I would also say it is better to err on the side of caution in some aspects, because you don't want to have this huge, disastrous impact on the world because we have let it just run ragged and let it run free.
Yeah, well, I think it is going to be treated as a bit of a test case. I think a lot of countries will be just watching and seeing what happens. And undoubtedly, it's going to have to be kind of augmented or reviewed and changed as it goes through things. I mean, the fines are quite substantial as well. Non-compliance, it says, can result in fines of up to 7% of annual global turnover, or 35 million euros. So we're not talking about small paltry sums here. We're talking about significant impact. So for those in the EU in construction, you really do have to be careful about the systems that you're using and making sure that they are compliant. I mean, I know that it mainly falls on the developers, but you could definitely see how this could impact, construction developers and clients as well at some point. And, it might be another like GDPR kind of issue where people start grappling with what exactly it means for a period of time until it all settles down. But, really, if you are impacted or you want to know more about it, do read up on it. We've put a link to 3 or 4 really, really good articles in the newsletter that you can read up a bit more about it. So yeah, that was it on the EU Act. So let's see where that goes. But on a similar level, I also want to talk about what the UK are doing, because the new UK government, right? We've got Labour government in. They're making all the kind of right noises about AI, although they have taken away some funding for certain opportunities. So it's a little bit of a mixed message. They shelved a £1.3 billion plan for an ultra-fast supercomputer. Yeah, exactly. So they've shelved that. So they're walking a fine kind of
their initial actions towards their strategy for AI looks a bit underwhelming. It looks a bit unfocused, because they're basically undone. They've undone a lot of what the Tories have done recently. So you go back to 2021 and 2022 and 3, right, the last few years. The Tories opened up, what was it, ARIA, the Advanced Research Invention Agency, run by Matt Clifford, who Labour are now putting into power for a different initiative. The Tories set that up, right? And that was an independent research institution of some sort, whereby it's high risk, high reward, right? So they're starting to develop a lot of technologies which would create a paradigm shift in technology, which is great. So Labour have, in some sense, undone a lot of that work, but they've also undone the commitment of, was it the 1.3 billion to Exascale, which is a supercomputer in Edinburgh, which means now it looks like they're taking away a lot of that infrastructure from the UK, even though they were promising they were going to be investing a lot into AI infrastructure. So there is that question of, okay, so what are they actually doing? Now, I did some further research into this and found that, okay, now the UK government have actually appointed Matt Clifford, who was the chair, I think, of ARIA at the time, to now run this UK action plan. And the UK action plan is focused on making sure that we adopt AI within the UK and also pushing developments. Now, Clifford brings a lot of experience in this field. So he co-founded Code First Girls. So it was kind of bridge the gap, between the sexes in terms of within technology.
Mm-hmm.
He was a co-founder of Entrepreneur First, and he also served as a council member at the innovation agency for Innovate UK.
Yeah, so he's got serious credibility.
So they've done a lot of what the Tories are doing, and they're implementing a new approach. It's just the first signs of what they've done is looking to undo it. Whether or not they come up with a plan after, and if the UK action plan is that, we'll have to see.
Well, I think I think it is a balancing the books act for the government,
Yes.
which is why they've had to shelve it. And hopefully, when the economy improves and the books are balanced, some of these things will come back. But at least they have addressed it by appointing Matt. And in fact, we have reached out to Matt to see if we can get him on the podcast or in some way involved with the task force, because it's really important. And it does talk to the IPA paper, the IPA paper that came out that we spoke about around using data analytics and AI in construction projects, that was published, March, April?
Mm-hmm.
What this UK action plan, that absolutely upholds what the IPA have done. And it is, like you say, it's about driving AI adoption, which is the hardest thing, because the tech's there. And I think why they've appointed Matt is to make this happen is because they realise that there's two paths on this road to AI. Mm-hmm. There's the tech, and we're doing okay with the tech, and there is the funding historically, although some of it's been shelved. But the adoption, I think, is still the key throughout the UK, in fact throughout the world. How do we get people to adopt this? And I think that's what he's going to be mainly sort of focused on. And I hope that he really takes on board what a huge proportion of the economy, construction, energy and infrastructure are, and really focuses on that. Because at the moment, it is hard to get people to adopt these tools because of that kind of culture.
When you think of adoption, though, do you think adoption in terms of as a consumer, in the individual lives, or do you think adoption more in terms of within the workplace?
Both. I think one leads to the other. And that's why I've been very much saying to people, if you're not sure about these AI tools, try using it in your personal life on a personal project before you bring it into the workplace, because that's a really, really good way of getting people to sort of test it out. But because the construction industry or the project delivery profession is such a huge part of the economy, the risk or the thing that I'm worried about is making sure that he does utilize that. I think it's ripe for exploring. So it'll be interesting to see now that he has been appointed what the action plan looks like, how he implements it, and what that actually means on the ground. Because there's been lots of papers, lots of research. We need some more doing now. So hopefully he'll really spearhead that.
Yeah, and I see a lot of So this is the intention is to improve the adoption of AI, but equally, and the reason why I kind of asked is it because is it more of an individual level or within the workplace, is because I'm a firm believer, kind of what Sam Altman says, where when he wrote his article in 2021, the Moore's Law article, saying that in time there will be a need for universal basic income, because AI itself, as an augmentation or more likely an automation tool, in my opinion, will start to drive a lot of the labor, goods, and the cost of goods and services, which is primarily driven by labor within the supply chain, will come down, and we need to raise the floor and not the ceiling. So it means that people will have this redistribution of wealth, that where we won't need to work to a certain extent. So this is something that I always find a lot of dissonance with, is people don't want to lose their jobs in certain aspects. But when you adopt AI, is it because you're adopting AI to improve the way you're working? But you also have to think about, okay, at some point, AI might actually take our jobs, and we might have to. Well,
the thing is, I'm torn on this one, Yoshi, because on the one hand, I can see very clearly with the AI plan, the AGI plan, how a lot of jobs can be affected, and especially when you take into account robotics and what that means. But on the other hand, every time we've had the technological advance, I mean, if you think how much more technology we have now than in the 50s, but yet we're all working harder, are we just going to, it's the old adage of, work expands to fill the time. So part of me thinks we'll just end up working just as hard on just other things. So
this is why, Yeah, and this is because we're speaking like of those who wouldn't have listened to this podcast yet, but we're talking with Ali Mafi, and Ali was saying that the key thing about projects is to drive down and be more efficient with time on projects, because when you're more effective with time, it also impacts your cost, it drives costs down.
Of course it does, yeah.
So then he said a lot of the issue with time is that we don't know what our priorities are in terms of what we're delivering on a project. So you have different roles within the project. People don't know, they have not got a strict priority in terms of what to do first, what's the critical path sort of thing. So then I asked him on the pod and said, okay, Ali, but if you were to replace the humans delivering the project with robots who are likely to be more obedient and have a lot more tunnel vision in terms of what their job is, would that be a more successful project outcome? And he said, yes. So this is where I'm thinking to myself, well, actually, if you were to remove humans out of that loop in delivering a project, especially on site, it may be more efficient, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, they don't, they work 24/7. Second of all, they won't have time off sick and etc. etc. Depending on how they feel, they won't have time off for the England game when it's the World Cup. There's all kinds of things like that. But I don't think that necessarily means that there won't be other things that come up, because you couldn't have imagined some of the roles that now exist 50 years ago, where we've just created new roles for people. So
the full, this is the full technological revolution, right? And
yeah. And imagine the role of influencer, right? Social media influencer. I mean, people will look at you like you're crazy if you said there was a profession for that in the 1950s. So there'll be new roles emerge. So I don't know. I'm kind of, like I say at the beginning, I'm kind of torn on it. It'd be interesting to see how it pans out. But
would you embrace it?
Human. Well,
would you embrace UBI?
Well,
for those that are listening, UBI, universal basic income. It's a more socialist.
I think humans as a species, we need to find things to do, right? We need to be productive. So I don't think anyone, it sounds great, but sitting around doing nothing your whole life whilst robots work for you, that is not what we were put on this earth to do. So it depends whether that will give us the freedom to do things that we really want to do. I can see that happening, but if we get to the point where it's just loads of people around not doing anything, then that could lead to social disharmony and all the consequences that come with that. So I really don't know.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Anyway, just moving on to another, because there are two more things I want to cover. I know we covered this when they announced it, but they're starting to roll out good old OpenAI. They're starting to roll out the voice feature now. I haven't got it yet, and I'm really gutted because I'm thinking I'm paying $20 a month. Why haven't I got it? But there's loads and loads of videos starting to make their way onto YouTube and TikTok, etc., showing just how good it is. And the press on it has been almost universally, this is open, because OpenAI has got loads of problems, which we're not going to have time to cover. Loads of people leaving. We'll probably cover that on the next week's podcast. But this is like their saving grace. It feels like this is going to be amazing. And I'm thinking for people in projects, I'm starting to see use cases where this is going to be used now. Like, it was a great kind of fad, and the hype around it was really, really cool when it was first announced. Now that I'm seeing it being used, I can see it becoming like another member of the team. And you're talking to it in the same way that you talk to any other members of the team, and it's providing information, it's providing reports for you, and it's doing it all hands-free. So I'm super, super excited to get my hands on it.
Yeah, and this also comes at a similar. I saw a product launch recently. I'm not sure if the product's been launched, but it's called Friend, and it's a necklace, right? And it's just a friend. It's like an assist, like a well-being friend, I guess, in that sense. So the advert was these people were going for a run, or they were going for a walk, etc., etc., and they were just logging and talking to their little device called Friend, and it was giving them information to kind of really to motivate them. So, and this again goes back to Sam Altman said, in 2021, he predicted and said that there'll be a time where AI will be used as assistance, will be used to help us analyze data, will help us to basically just be our friends. All these things have already happened. So this multimodal component of AI, I think, is going to definitely drive a lot of adoption. So the UK should, the EU and the UK should adopt that if we're allowed to.
Well, we got there was the rabbit device as well, which made a bit of a splash, which is similar. And some of these will be gimmicks that will disappear without a trace. I'm absolutely positive of that. But some of it will start shaping the future of the big tech companies. I'm starting to think now more and more that the big 5 or 6, they're just going to be immovable in this. And when they see something that is genuinely useful, they're just going to buy it out. So
exactly. If you take the view of a more capitalist approach, right, to this is that they're going to be driving up and monopolizing a lot of influence and control over the world. So that's where there's the risk associated with that sort of approach.
Yeah, no,
Because you create a massive disparity, right?
You do, and I think that's going to get bigger over the course of the next few years. There was an interesting, I'm only partway through it, but there was a massive interview with Elon Musk on the Lex Friedman podcast. I'll put the link in the show notes. It's 8 hours, sorry. Lex asked Elon the question, how long do you think you're going to be the first to AGI, whatever that means? And Elon basically said, yeah, I think we will, which he would say. But then he said, but in a way, it doesn't matter because the others are not going to be far behind, maybe 6 months. So what he's basically said, they're all going to get to the same place at around the same time. And the way that Apple and Microsoft are jostling for most valuable company in the world, it's going to be like that. There's going to be the 4 or 5 of them that just constantly jostle for
it's like good competition, isn't it? It's like when you're in the gym and you got your mates lifting with you, it drives you up to lift more, doesn't it? It's like a healthy competition.
Yeah. I think there is a lot to that, but there's a danger of that, right? Because I think that what's happening is some of them are going ahead, full steam ahead, without thinking of the consequences, which explains some of the issues that have happened at the OpenAI board. Just for those listening, that's only today dropped, but there's been some more people resign. There's been one of their founders moved over to Anthropic. So, all these things are playing out in front of our eyes.
The question for you, James, then.
Yeah, go.
If you do get access to the voice control, the voice mode,
I better do, otherwise I'm going to start complaining to Sam himself.
What's the first few use cases you can think of for yourself?
I'm just going to start getting it rather than having to type. I think we're going to have this move. This is going to be the first time we have this proper move away from type as an interface to talk. So, imagine sitting there and you're just asking for stuff and it's just bringing stuff up for you. And it's going to be a bit of a transition because we've been so used to type as the interface that we're going to have to move to voice. Now, what's interesting, going back to the Elon Musk interview, obviously he's got Neuralink that he's working on.
Neuralink,
and he's actually talking about the next stage after that, which is just thoughts, right? We don't want to go down that rabbit hole because
you're going to get me to a whole new.
But what he's saying, typing is super slow, right? It's super, super slow to get something out of your mind. Type it. It doesn't matter how good a typist you are, and then wait for the input. Talking's a bit faster. It's still pretty slow, though, in terms of bits per second that you can transmit, because you've got to get it out of your head. You've got to turn it into a sound wave that then reaches your ears that you digest. And the chance for error in that's massive. What Elon Musk was saying, the Neuralink is going to enable sort of thought to thought. So serious rabbit hole. Let's not go down there. But basically, that's where we're heading, right? But I think we've got to make that jump first from type to talk, and I think what voice mode's going to do, and as the other ones sort of join up, we're going to start becoming more and more used to just asking for things.
And also, I do wonder as well, because when you think, you think with a dialogue, you have an inner dialogue. So I do wonder how when that communication happens
apparently
through your
not
mind,
everyone does. I read something today
not everyone's
saying
got
not
an internal
everyone
monologue,
does, which I could not believe because my one drives me mad.
Like you do a silent podcast.
Oh my god, it's just
silent podcasting.
Yeah, but yeah, and listen, just one more story I quickly want to cover before we end up was one from the wonderful Paul Hemming. So those who don't know Paul Hemming from C-Link, he's got a brilliant podcast called Own the Build, which I've been lucky enough to appear on. So do check that one out. Hopefully we'll get him on this podcast one day. But he did a great survey on LinkedIn, and I asked him if I could use it because it was quite insightful. He looked at what level people, he categorized 4 levels. Level 1 being companies that are primarily using basic tools like the Microsoft Power Suite. Level 2 is partial adoption of digital tools with some standardization. Level 3 was advanced tools with significant automation, and level 4 was fully integrated workflows, AI, big data, etc., etc. So the stats I thought were really, really interesting because you had quite most people were still in that level 1, right? So nearly half of people in the construction space were in that, and I think he focuses very much on quantity surveying, right? So nearly half of those were which is pitiful. And then out of the other ones, another sort of half between the two of them were between level 2 and level 3, and only 9%, which actually was more than I thought, were fully integrated.
That's what I thought, more, 9%.
I don't think anyone's fully integrated. But the big takeaway for me from this survey was how many people were still at level 1.
Yes, because of
We,
this, it is because of construction. I would say construction,
we got
the
work, we got
industry.
serious work, which reminds me we've still got serious work to do, which is why it's so important we do this. So anyone listening, I mean, sometimes I feel like very much I'm preaching to the choir, and a lot of people listening to this will be in this space already. And we're getting some great feedback on these podcast newsletters. Thank you. But please, one thing I would ask anyone listening to do, please share it with people who might not be as advanced or don't know where to start, because that's really what we want to do. We want to start sort of changing the dial. And this kind of survey from Paul really highlighted to me that there needs to be a lot more education in this space, that there is more to life than Excel. Excel's got its space. I love Excel. I love a good spreadsheet, but we shouldn't be doing half the stuff that we're doing on Excel. We should be utilizing other tools.
Yeah, and I
So
guess this is why, the UK's, approach now in appointing Matt Clifford to drive AI adoption from a government perspective should seep into a lot of the industry. So we should see that number increase because of a number of factors.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are the big stories. There's plenty more in the newsletter. We've also got an event that we're showing. There's a great event from BDO on the 11th of September that you can sign up to, Navigating AI in Business, Opportunities and Challenges. We got the links to our previous podcasts and then all the other stories around the world of AI in productivity, projects and tech. So enjoy. But for that, I think we're done for this session, Yoshi, unless there's any other words from you.
Yeah, just one small thing from me. So I was on Twitter the other day and I saw that one of the researchers at Anthropic, so for you guys who don't know, Anthropic are one of developed Claude, which is one of the frontier large language models. And he just gave an indication about how it is when you're forced to use AI, how effective it can be. So he said a few months ago, I broke my hand while biking to work in San Francisco. I could only type with my left hand. By using a combination of voice to text and Claude, I was still able to write a tremendous amount of code at my job at Anthropic, including 1 week when I wrote over 3,000 lines of code, admittedly boilerplate heavy code. The silver lining of all this is that it forced me to live in the future where humans write very little of our own code. Honestly, I loved it.
Yeah.
So accessibility, huge thing, adoption.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of people who sort of worry about AI, but there's a lot of horror stories, but there's a lot of very, very important use cases out there as well, that being one of them. So listen, everyone, Friday we'll be dropping the interview with Ali Maffey. Absolutely brilliant. So thanks, Ali, for that. And we'll be back next week. At some point, I'm going to have a holiday, so you'll get Yoshi on his own. But until then, we'll see you on Friday. Bye, everyone.